Okay, skill check A gives you the opportunity to practice reading through 4 more data sets and determining what type of graph would most accurately represent that data. Okay, now let's talk about the actual features of graphs and charts. There's some things that have to be included in order for somebody to be able to understand the information that you're putting on the chart, right? If you just have numbers and you don't have any words across the bottom or the side, how is anybody going to know what those numbers represent? They're not. You need a title to your chart, right? So look at the bottom of page 528. You see where they've charted the average quarterly church attendance. This is how many people are coming to church each quarter. And so they just have every third month appearing on their chart. January, then April, then June, then September, then January, April, June, and September. But if we didn't have labels across the bottom to tell us what those were representing, it might be difficult to figure that out. And if we didn't have that label, that vertical label up the side that says attendance, we wouldn't know what in the world those numbers represented. And then if we didn't have a title across the top, we wouldn't know what that represented. Now, what if we didn't have those horizontal grid lines? I mean, those lines going, what if we didn't have the vertical grid lines, I mean? It wouldn't be as easy, would it, to see where each of those little dots fall if we didn't have those lines helping kind of keep it straight. Could you add lines going across and make this chart even better to read, easier to read? Yeah, you could. Is it 100% necessary? Maybe not, but it would make it a little bit easier or better if you wanted to do that. Okay? So look at the top of page 529. These are key graph features. A title should summarize the relationship between the categories and the quantities, right? And then each axis should be labeled. That means, look, your horizontal axis, whatever's across the bottom of your graph, it needs a label. Your vertical axis, whatever's going up the side of your graph, it needs a label. That's horizontal and vertical axis. It's the X and the Y, but we'll call it horizontal and vertical. And then generally, what does it say about your scaled values? Where should they start?
0.
Generally, your graph is going to start at 0. Why do you think we would want to start at 0? It wouldn't show negative values. It would just show where it started from 0. There are times we don't start at 0. For instance, if you were showing average miles per hour or something like that, at 0 miles per hour, something's not even moving. So we might not would start a chart like that at 0. But most of the time, we're going to use scaled values starting at 0. And then the scaled values on the axis, the horizontal and the vertical, should be scaled so that the gap between each mark is the same quantity, right? So if you start at 0 and your next line over says 10, then you can't do a line that says 15. Why would that be wrong? Let me put it up here so you can see what I'm talking about. If you start at 0 and your next line over says 10, why can your next one not say 15?
Because you went from 0 to 10.
There's a gap of an interval of 10 here and only 5 here. So it's not the same scale. You got to keep your scale consistent, right, when you're building your graph. So let's talk about a bar graph in particular and some important characteristics of a bar graph. We're going to look at several different types of graphs more specifically in this lesson. So a bar graph, look at the 2 bar graphs by example 2 and tell me which one is clearer to read.
Figure 2.
Okay, why is figure 2 easier and clearer to read?
It has lines at every end of like the tower thing. There's a line
Okay, so 2 reasons. Figure 2 is color coded, right? That makes it easier right there. Also, figure 2, it uses a scale of 2 rather than a scale of 5 up the side, right? And so the interval is smaller, and that makes it a little easier to read. Look at example 3, the pie charts. Which pie chart is the easiest to read? Okay. Why is the first one, figure 3, easier to read and clearer than figure 4? It gives us percentages instead of quantities, right? And that helps us because the entire pie represents 100%. So it helps us when we have percentages instead of quantities. And look at the title of the pie charts. What does the title say? Percent of attendance by age group. But look at figure 4. The title says percent of attendance, but does it give us percentages? No. So the data that's listed doesn't even match the title of the pie chart. So figure 3 is clearer because of that. It's kind of neat that figure 4 is kind of like a 3D figure, right? And that the colors change. It's color coded, but figure 3 ends up being clearer because it shows percentages, and that matches the title of what we're supposed to be looking at. So that's an important thing with a pie chart. Let's look at example 4. What differences do you see between these 2 line graphs? One of them's blue, one's red. Okay. What else?
One's from 2021 and one's from 2022.
Okay, correct. These are from 2 different years. What else do you see?
The way the lines are going, they're different.
Okay, the trajectory or the growth is different for each one.
One goes from 100 to 250, and one goes from 70 to 270.
Okay. One goes from 100 to 250 and the other goes from 70 to 270. So they're not scaled the same, are they? So it's hard to compare information that's not scaled the same. The one on the left has about 130 between each number, right? And then the one on the right, figure 6, it only has 20 between each number. So you can't compare 2 things that are not exactly alike. So also these scales don't start at 0, do they? They don't. It may not be necessary for them to start at 0 because I doubt they want to plot when there were 0 people attending church, right? And I mean, who's going to keep count if nobody's there? Nobody's keeping count, right? So it's not necessary for them to start at 0, but you can't really compare them well. Now look down below where you see figure 7. Do you see how they've put both of those years on the same chart? And it's easy to compare, right? Because they're both on the same chart. One year is blue, one year is red. But the scale on the left-hand side is the same now for both sets of data. It's 25 points between each number for both sets of data. And so we can see that in 2022, there were points where attendance was much lower than 2021, but there's also some points where attendance is higher than 2021, right? And it's easier to compare the information. Just by looking, it looks like attendance was maybe more consistent in 2021, but it's a line graph is really not the best if we want to compare the information for these 2 years. But look at figure 8. What if we put that information on a box and whisker?
Yeah.
Can we compare it more easily? Yes. Right? We can see that the average attendance in 2022 was 160. The average attendance in 2021 was 170, right? And we can see that there was a much lower attendance and a much higher attendance in 2022. and the fact that the box is longer on 2022, the spread, the range is longer than 2021, tells us that 2021 probably had more consistent attendance, a higher average, and more consistency. So that's a better way to present that data. And Skill Check B lets you look at different information that's been presented that is problematic. And it lets you identify what's the problem with each of these graphs. Why are these not good representations of the data?